Hi everyone, it's Chris, and I am back today sharing a card that I have made as an example for the new challenge that is happening this week over at Stamp TV. I'm hosting this week's challenge at Stamp TV, and the challenge this week is called Have You Seen It? And the challenge is to make a scene with your stamps. I love scene stamping, and I just love that these stamps from that designed by Teresa Mauber for Gina K Designs work so well with this technique. I'm using the set called By the Sea, and I'm using my Misty and Ranger glossy paper to create this card. I'm going to be using Stuart Superior's India ink for my stamping today. And India ink it works really well with water techniques. It dries quite quickly and it doesn't smear when used on this glossy paper. I'm using the lighthouse, which I have stamped just slightly off my card panel, and I'm adding the sailboat. I'm going to add the little flock of seagulls towards the top of my lighthouse, and then I'm going to be adding some of the beach grasses in the foreground to create my water beachside scene. And I'm just stamping these little beach grasses, and I'm just moving my cardstock rather than moving the stamp. I'm just going to slide it over. I want it, slightly varied in direction and the height of the grasses, but I'm not being very precise. And because this ink is so sticky, you really don't need to press very hard at all because it will stamp very nicely. And I just stamped a couple of those little beach grass images, and now I'm going to add, kind of more of a, I don't know, almost reminds me of a wheat. And I'm just going to stamp that twice. And again, I'm just sliding my paper over rather than moving my stamp. I want it just a little bit taller. And this is my foreground. I am not coloring any sand in the foreground, so you'll just see that kind of outcropping of the rock landscape that the lighthouse is on and the horizon of the water. So I'm going to zoom in so you can see this a little better. Apologize earlier for it being just too sunny in my craft room, so it kind of washed out my first section of video there, so now it should be easier to see. I'm using some 3M Post-it tape. It's a 2-inch wide tape and it is fully adhesive on the back. I've just taken a piece of that, torn it in half so I have a rough edge, and I'm using that as kind of a mask to create the tops of my clouds in the sky. And I'm just going to reuse it over and over. I'm going to stamp it move the tape a couple of times and just add color to the top of that rough edge. And that's just going to give me kind of a hint of the clouds in the sky. I just want them kind of wispy and floating across the horizon there. And then I'm just going to add a little bit to soften that edge. Now I'm using that same piece that I've torn, only I'm using the straight edge, and that is what I'm using to create my horizon line. I'm stamping the rest of, or sorry, not stamping, but inking the rest of my sky. I'm using Ocean Mist ink from Gina K Designs, and just working above that tape right now. And I'm darkening the sky at the horizon. And now I've taken a fresh piece of tape so I'd have a really nice fresh edge. And I've covered up what I previously inked, and now I'm going to work on the lower part of the horizon line. I'm just using that ink blending sponge and pulling the color in as close to my images as possible. I'm not terribly concerned about going over the images because I am going to be adding color to them in a bit. And again, I'm using the Ocean Mist, and I'm also bringing in some powder blue right over the top because I want a little more depth to the color and to kind of tone down the little bit of the greenish aqua hue. And I want the water, closest to me to be a little bit darker. I'm going to do the same with the the rock formation, or where the lighthouse is sitting. And this is craft ink that I have brought in. And then I'm going to just remove my mask. And there you see this very subtle horizon line. Now I'm going to add some color to my images, and I have found the craziest thing. I was using my paintbrushes to pick up ink and to paint in, but I hated using my really good watercolor brushes to do this. So I happened to be at Walmart one day and I saw makeup brushes, and these are just really inexpensive. I think they're the e.l.f. brand, like $1 or $2. They're called smudge brushes, and they're for like lip liner or eyeshadow, and they have the softest, really short bristles that work amazingly for adding a little bit of color with the ink pads. So I am using one of these smudge brushes, which is a makeup brush, and this is Moonlit Fog ink, and I'm just coloring, just dragging in some color on the edge of my lighthouse image. Moonlit Fog is a little bit of a greenish gray, and I'm just adding a little bit of shadow to the back side of the sailboat, and also pulling just a shadowy shape. Because I'm using such a light color, I can always change my mind. So I kind of am just penciling in or sketching in my intended shadow first, because if I didn't like it, I can always go back in with my aqua mist and my powder blue. So a little practice is a good thing sometimes. So now I'm bringing in the shadow of the land formation and the lighthouse also with that gray. And I'm going to continue adding color. I always start with the light colors and just keep going darker. So I'm going to add a little more brown to the landscape. And I'm going to color in the sails. I want a nice bright sailboat, so I am using Wild Dandelion. And then I'm going to color the sailboat red. So I'm using lipstick and cherry red for the base of the sailboat. And I just clean my brushes with baby wipes because the ink comes right out of them. I mean, every once in a while I will go, actually wash them with a brush cleaner and get everything out. But for the most part, I can just wipe off most of the ink right out of those bristles. Now I've added a little more of the brown to the landscape. Here I'm adding more of the shadow and detail with, this is charcoal brown. I had already added a little bit of the dark chocolate, but decided that that wasn't quite dark enough. So I want to deepen that a little bit. I want it kind of in shadow. I'm pulling a little bit through the water, deepening the shadow from the lighthouse, and I will bring a little bit over towards that sailboat too. I know most of these supplies, most of you have any dye ink pads. I'm using the Gina K inks, and these makeup brushes are a very inexpensive way to color with your ink pads. Now I'm using the black onyx ink, and I'm deepening the color. I'm coloring the little roof of a kind of a lean-to, the entrance, adding more to the edge of that lighthouse and just kind of pulling that across, a little more at the roof. And then I'm going to deepen the shadow along the edge, right along the water line. I'm just kind of drawing in a line, little characteristics to the rocks, and just creating shapes with color. And the contrast is what makes your coloring. Now I'm going to bring in more of the shadow from the sailboat. And I'm not doing a solid shape. I'm kind of just brushing in a light base and almost doing stripes. So it kind of looks like as a reflection across the water, or maybe ripples through the waves. I'm just getting a good hint. And I always check my brushes before I switch colors just to make sure that they're clean, or clean enough. Now I'm going to add some glitter because I want the horizon line to really be shimmering. So I'm using a little bit of liquid glue. I just have a few dots of liquid glue on my paper and a spritz of water. I want to kind of thin it out a little bit with water. And I'm using a paintbrush, and I'm just going to draw some lines with glue across my horizon. And just pull a little bit through the water line here. And then I'm using Nuvo glitter. This is a pure sheen glitter, and it is called Diamond is the color. And I'm using a brush to brush off any excess. I want a very thin coat, and you'll see it kind of reflecting in the light here, so it kind of disappears. Now I'm adding some white. This is the Gina K White Pigment Ink. I'm using a brush for that, and I am brightening some edges of the clouds, just kind of dabbing this in, kind of sponging, making, a thin, almost like an airbrush look through those clouds. It takes care of any sharpness of the lines and brightens the white a little bit, so it can be a nice summery cloud-filled day. I just want that wispy look. And anywhere that you think you've gotten your color just a little bit too dark, you can always add a little bit of white pigment. Just brush it in very lightly and you will lighten that area as well. Now I'm going to add my little sentiment here, and I'm just doing the Thinking of You sentiment. I'm also using the India ink here because it dries very quickly and easily on this glossy paper. And there it is. You can see the shimmer. You can catch the light a little bit, and you can see it doesn't show up quite as well in the photograph. You need that light hitting it. But I've just trimmed it a little bit so I can mount it on a In the Navy card base. And there's my card. So I hope that you'll join us at Stamp TV and click on this week's challenges on the Stamp TV site and play along with us and create a scene with stamps. So thanks for watching, everyone. Have a great week.